Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this, the fifth in a series of webinars on identity by Candatis. The webinar will last for around 30 to 40 minutes and as usual will be followed by a Q&A session. I am David Manning, an architect with Candatis, and I'm joined once again by Dave Downs, one of the senior developers here. For those of you who've missed them, we've got recordings of the earlier webinars in our B2C series on our website, describing what B2C is, how it works, and how to implement a variety of increasingly complex user journeys. Today, we're going to be discussing some of the more advanced features that can be used in B2C controlled user journeys to provide more choice, greater flexibility, and some more control over the user experience. Specifically, we're going to talk about support for customized emails in response to specific actions taken in a user journey. We'll talk about the use of conditional access to provide greater control over the user journey, and some of the additional forms of credentials that can be used in place of, or perhaps to supplement, traditional username and password, helping to ensure that the user experience is as smooth as possible while maintaining security. So customized emails. There are many reasons why a service provider might want to send an email to a service user. In preceding webinars, we've shown examples of the default mails that B2C generates and sends using Microsoft branding. However, drawing on the last webinar in this series, where we described the use of APIs for B2C to integrate with external systems, we're now going to demonstrate how B2C can make use of custom branded emails sent as required during user journeys. Some reasons for sending emails as part of a journey would be to perform verification of the email address used as a login identifier, as we've seen in various of the previous sessions. Perhaps to describe terms and conditions, terms of use of the capabilities of the service, or maybe even to invite a new user to register for the service. So Dave will now lead us through some code snippets to illustrate the use of customized emails in a couple of these scenarios.
Cool, thanks. Right, so this will probably be a familiar sight to anyone who's been to see any of the previous webinars. We've got our line pipe that we're going to sign to and our B2C policy. Just before we jump into the emails, I'm just going to talk a bit about subjourneys, because we're going to be jumping around a lot today with various different bits of functionality. And rather than have a big long user journey, which has a ton of orchestration steps in, what we've done is we've grouped together series of steps into little mini user journeys called subjourneys, and that's a new feature in B2C. It's still in public preview, but it just allows you to group all the functionality in a way that makes it easier to understand, easier to work with. So if you see us jump around between different things, that's why the journeys are grouped up according to the functionality that we're talking about. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the scenarios in which we want to generate some custom emails and how we're going to do it. So we're really talking about our sign up process at the moment. So you can see here that we've got our subjourney specifically to do with sign up that's just got our sign up steps in it. And we've got our user account sign up page, which is just the same page that we've been showing in every other webinar. After that, as part of the sign up journey, we want to send a welcome email. So once we've registered successfully, we want to use an API call, just like we did in the previous webinar, to send a welcome email, send a branded email to our user, welcoming them onto the system, maybe notifying them about features they might want to look out for, that kind of thing. We've also then got a logging step, which again calls back to a previous webinar that we did. We're not really going to go into logging this time, but it's just one of the steps that we're doing as part of our registration. So how do the emails actually work? Well, let's start with our send welcome email. We'll take a look at how that's actually working. If I go and take a look at that, you'll see, just like we've had in all of the other webinars, when we're executing a particular step in a journey, what we're doing is we're executing a technical profile, which just tells B2C how that step works. So in our case, we've called it API send welcome email because we want to send the welcome email using an API call. We create a JSON body because it's an API call. So we create the welcome email body. And if I expand this out, all that is just a transformation that generates some JSON, so generates a JSON object. It's going to take our sign-in email, which we'll have and we'll see in a minute. It's going to take our given name, so the first name of the user. It's going to use that to create part of the JSON body. It's going to specify the template of the email that we want to use, the email address that it's coming from, the subject, and all of which creates a JSON object, a little bit of JSON in the email request body claim. Once we've created that, we're then going to reference another technical profile to actually make the API call to actually send that JSON somewhere. And we've called that API send grid because we want to use the send grid send mail API to actually send the mail to the user. So you can see here, like we had in the previous webinar, it's a RESTful provider because it's an API call. We've got a URL, which is the URL to the general send grid API. And then here we're saying it's secured using a bearer token. And then we've got the token that we generated in our SendGrid account that we can use to execute this API call. And then we're just saying the claim that's used for the request payload, the one that we're going to use to actually send with the request, is coming from our email request body. So we've built up that JSON in the transformation, and then we're sending it using this API. And that ultimately will send our welcome email template. Now, we've defined our template over in SendGrid. So we've got two templates set up. We've got our welcome one, which I was just talking about. So once we've done our registration, that's going to send me an email. Welcome to the webinar. Hi, bit of personalization. So that was my forename that I was passing in, and then just some text that I've entered. You know, we could design this however we want. I've just set it up with the same branding as we've got over here. We've also set up another template, and this is for sending out the one-time passcode email. So you can see here, similar deal, branded. We're going to personalize it with an email address and a one-time passcode that we're going to generate. Now, we use that one-time passcode as part of this email address verification. In the previous webinars, we were also doing a one-time passcode email verification, but it was all done through B2C's own logic. We didn't have any control over the code that got generated, the template that was used, or the email account it was sent from. That was all provided by B2C and Microsoft branded. So what we've done for this webinar is not just provide a customized welcome email once we've registered, but we've replaced the logic in this email verification to use our own branded email template, using that template that we've set up in SendGrid. So we've got our, if I expand out the right technical profile, we've got our sign up page defined as a technical profile, which is largely the same as it has been in all of the other webinars. We're still defining all of the fields that go on the page, all the validation that goes along with them, which ones are required, the order they appear in, all that kind of stuff. But what we've done now is we've had to move them over into a new section called display claims. Before, they were just in output claims, the things that were coming out of the page. And we've done that so that one of them, our email verification control, can be a display control, which is a particular kind of control in B2C that allows us to set up actions that sends a code and verifies a code. So we've said it's our email verification control. So if we go look at that, we'll see over here we've defined it as a display control. If I just slide across slightly. We want to capture our sign-in email, which is our email address that we're showing here. We eventually want to capture our verification code, and we're saying we want to capture that when the control is in the verification code mode. So we'll see in a minute this change, but one of the things that we want to capture is the code that gets sent to us in the email so that we can verify it, and that's this claim here. Ultimately, once we've done the verification, what we want out of this control is just our email. Our verified email, the one that we know is now correct. As part of defining this control, we set up actions. So we've got one action when the user clicks the send code button, and then we've got one action that will happen when the user clicks the verify code button. And this is what allows us to override B2C's default code generation behavior and email sending with our own particular email templates, our own code. So here we're saying when we click the send code, we want to do two things. We want to generate a one-time passcode, and then we want to send that one-time passcode using that email template that we defined in SendGrid. So if I go to generate code, over here. This is just another kind of technical profile, exactly the same again. All we're doing throughout all of this is just executing technical profiles. We're saying it's a one-time passcode technical profile and that we want to generate a one-time passcode code. We can specify some things about the format of the code and how many attempts the user gets to enter it before it's a failure. We couldn't do that previously with the stuff that just comes with B2C. That's not allowed. With this, we get much more control over the actual token and the validation involved in that token. We tie it to the user's email, the one that they've entered here, so that when we do the verification, we can make sure that we're verifying the right code against that email address. And then once the code's been generated, we just store it in the one-time passcode field. So signing the email comes in, we generate a code linked to that email, and then we save that code internally within B2C in the one-time passcode field. We then go back to our send code actions, and the next thing is we're going to send our one-time passcode email. So same as our other email, we want to create an email body, this time using the one-time passcode. So that's exactly the same as the other one. We're just building up a JSON object, but this time the personalization is going to include the email address and the one-time passcode, but otherwise we specify the template ID, the subject, all of the stuff that the SendGrid API needs, and then we call it using our SendGrid API call. So when I click send, when I enter my email address, if I do that, and I click send code, we're going to generate a code and send it using our SendGrid API. So you see that moves into the verify code mode. So now when I click my verify code button, it's going to execute my verify code action, which if we take a look at that while we're waiting for the email to come through, that's just another one-time passcode technical profile. But this time, instead of it being a generate code, it's a verify code. And we're again passing in the sign-in email as the identifier to say the code's associated with this email address. And we're passing in our verification code that we're capturing up here. This is the same verification code that we've said we're going to capture in our control, so we can verify the one-time passcode that came through. So I'll enter my password while I'm waiting. That's come through. If I open up my email, so you can see that my email's come through. I've got my branded email using my template from SendGrid. It's put my email address in it. It's put my one-time passcode in that it's just generated. And if I enter that and verify that, so now it's run my verify technical profile and it's verified my code successfully, so I can now continue. Oh, we'll cancel out of that for the moment. So we can see there that what we've got is we've got our email being sent through as part of our one-time passcode, and I've got a notification that I've just received another email. We've got our email coming through as part of completing our registration process, all of which use our SendGrid API to actually send the email. Now, it doesn't have to be SendGrid, we're just using that because it's easy to set up and it's got an API. It could be any email provider that's got an API or any email provider that you can provide an API for. But that ultimately gives you customized email verification. If I hand back.
Okay, great, thank you. So that shows the power of using customization in emails that can be generated and sent by B2C as part of a B2C controlled user journey. And it demonstrates how service-specific branding can be maintained for the entire journey, giving a consistent user experience. So we saw the same branding being used on the web pages and in the resultant email. So we've just seen a common operation there is within B2C registration is the use of the one-time passcode as a form of multi-factor authentication. To date, we've discussed its use either as the initial form of authentication or perhaps as an elevation step when accessing more sensitive customer information. But it can also be used conditionally within a user journey, where B2C identifies some additional risk associated with the current user sign-in. So there are many reasons for varying the user journey for a given customer, such as usage that falls outside of a recognised pattern, perhaps access from an unusual geographic area, or indeed access from an unknown or even a recognised risky IP address. So let's now have a look at some code snippets that illustrate the additional control that can be implemented using the conditional access logic in user journeys.
Yep, so if I flip back again, so the conditional access really starts up in our B2C tenant. So you can see down the left-hand side here, I've got a conditional access option in my security menu, and you'll see that it's still in preview, but it's worth knowing about because it's quite powerful and allows you to do some quite good things. So if I go look at that, it allows us to set up policies that dictate whether our users should be allowed straight into the application, whether they should be allowed in but prompted for multi-factor authentication, or whether they should be blocked entirely. We set up the policies in here to apply our particular rules, and we'll go through the rules in a moment. In our custom policies, we then ask B2C to run our authenticated user through these policies to generate one or a number of those recommendations, where they should be blocked, where they should be prompted for MFA, where they should just be allowed in. Based on that information, the result of B2C evaluating these policies against the user, we can then take the appropriate action. If B2C said it recommends that we apply MFA, maybe we show some MFA screens. If it recommends that we should be blocked, then maybe we prevent the user from progressing. Once we've taken those actions in our policy, in our B2C user journey, then we make a call back to B2C to say, I've now performed the action that you recommended, that's now been remediated. So you'll see here that I've set up two policies to start with. One about how I want to apply MFA, and another one about blocking actors that I know to be bad, blocking users that I don't want to have access to the system anymore. So if we go take a look at some of these, you see they're split up into a number of sections. You can, for a start, you can name it. I've just given it a basic name. You can specify the users and groups that the policy applies to. So in my case, I've said that it wants to apply to all users, but I want to exclude one particular user, which isn't a B2C user, it's my user that's managing the directory. So in my case, I want this to apply to everyone except for my Active Directory user who won't sign in using B2C. But equally, I could say I want it to apply to particular roles, guest and external users, particular users and groups. You can be very specific about this. We've then got the apps that it applies to. So again, I've said I wanted it to apply to all applications, but I could select one of a number of different applications or multiple different applications. And you'll see here, these are all the applications that my B2C tenant knows about, which include my OpenID Connect Relying Party, so the app I'm signing in with over here. We've got my SAML Relying Party from one of the earlier webinars where we had two different relying parties that we could sign in with. We've got a dashboard relying party, which was another relying party that we had earlier in one of the other webinars. So we can be quite specific about which apps should, for example, prompt a user for MFA. Or we could say all apps, but exclude one or a number of the apps that we know about. Maybe some apps aren't quite as sensitive as others, or maybe some apps are more sensitive, so we only want to apply the MFA policy specifically. We can set specific conditions under which the policy applies. So we set the users, we set the apps, and then we set under what conditions does this policy actually take effect. So these apply differently depending on the level of service that you're getting out of B2C. So you can have a P1 B2C tenant or you can have a P2 B2C tenant. The P2 one, user authentications are slightly more expensive the more you do. The P1, slightly less expensive, but you don't get things like user risk calculations or sign-in risk calculations. The risk calculations are really Microsoft's, they're their own internal logic, the Active Directory logic that they're applying, right? They're looking at all of the signals for a particular user or a particular sign-in, how that user is behaving, where they're coming from, everything that they know about that user, everything they know about that sign-in, to make a decision about how risky is that user as a person, and how risky is this user's sign-in as an action. Now, they don't publish the exact rules that they're going to apply because they obviously don't want people to be able to work around them. But what they do say is the higher the likelihood of the risk, the more confident you can be that this user is potentially not someone that you want to be allowing into the system, or this sign-in is potentially not a sign-in that you want to be allowing. So we can then make a judgment, okay, well, maybe if they're a medium risk user, we want to allow them in with MFA, but if they're a high risk user, then maybe we want to block them. So we can start to build policies up based on how risky either the user is or that user's particular sign-in is. We can also say we want to vary the policy so that they apply to only particular devices. So maybe we only want to require MFA if the user's on Android or iOS. We want to have extra security on the phones, or maybe we don't want to allow phones, we just block it outright. We could have allowed any device, but then exclude certain devices. So our policy would apply to everyone except those people who are using Windows or who are using Mac OS. And similarly with locations. So we can make a decision based on where a user is signing in from, what's their IP address. So we could allow any locations, or we could apply MFA to any locations except for certain trusted locations. So if I'm on my work VPN, maybe I don't have to provide MFA, but if I'm anywhere else, maybe I do. So all of these factors are what goes into actually setting up your policy. You can create a quite granular set of policies to apply MFA, to apply blocking in various different scenarios for different categories, different groups, different usages. What you're ultimately doing with each of these policies is choosing for that particular set of criteria, what's the grant type? Is it a block? So should the user be prevented outright from accessing the system, or is it a grant but they require MFA? So we can then build up a fairly complex list of policies that apply to various different groups, each of which say, okay, under certain circumstances, we're going to block them. Under certain circumstances, we're going to grant them access, but require multi-factor authentication. If none of the policies apply to a user, then that user is considered to just be allowed straight in with no problems, no hassles, no prompts, nothing, just straight into the system. So my default require MFA one, having explained all of that, is basically apply to all users, apply to all apps, apply to all devices, all user types, grant access but require MFA. So any user who tries to access my system, as you probably saw at the end of that registration, requires an MFA check. It requires them to be prompted, have some kind of device, verify who they are. We've also got my block known bad actors. So similarly, we want to apply this to only select users and groups this time, and this is anyone that I put in the malicious users group. So I'm explicitly adding users to a particular group in my B2C tenant. Anyone in that group gets blocked, is recommended not to sign in. Again, all apps, any condition, and we're recommending just block access. We'll come back to that shortly. So how does that actually apply to my policy? So if I go back to my main journey, so we've got our base sign-in journey. So we do that as normal, exactly as we've done in all of the other webinars. We then go into another sub-journey, which is where we're evaluating our conditional access. So we've set up all those policies in AD, but then we're asking B2C to run the user through them. So if I go look at this particular sub-journey, we've got two steps in here. And the first one is, let's evaluate the user against all of those policies. So it's a conditional access technical profile, and we're just doing some basic things. We're passing in the ID of the user that we've just signed in. We're saying the authentication method that they used, and we're confirming that they're not a federated user. This is applying only to users that have an account in B2C, not someone who's using social like Google or Facebook or using another Active Directory, just our B2C users. And then we're saying whether they're MFA registered. And out of that, we want a list of things that apply to the user. So in our case, whether they want MFA applying or whether they want to be blocked. Once we've got that, we're just going to run another technical profile. We won't go look at it, but it's purely a transformation just to say, given that collection that comes back, convert it into some flags that B2C can use. So we'll have a look. What does that look like? If I sign in, so if I use one of my demo accounts from previous webinar, Sign in. So that's run me through the policies. That's done my evaluate conditional access step. The policy that we set up to apply to everyone has returned that I need MFA applying. We've split that up into a bunch of flags. And then what we do is we access another subjourney. So we've done our conditional access, and that says, is our challenge an MFA challenge? That's one of the flags that we passed out of that collection. It is, so it goes into our register verify MFA subjourney. I won't go into the details of the subjourney because it's not particularly relevant to conditional access, but that's the subjourney that we're doing to actually prompt the user for MFA and then confirm, verify that they've provided it. So my user here, I don't have to register because I have set it up on a previous webinar. We did one where we did prompting for elevation, authenticated elevation. So if the user wants to access a separate section of the site, they have to go through this MFA process. So I've still got my phone number from that. So we've just sent me an SMS, which is, I think, so that was the correct code. So our register verify MFA subjourney handled that. And then we just had another subjourney after, which was our confirm back to B2C that we've then done the MFA. So we can see down here, that's again, just another technical profile that we're executing, conditional access remediation, where we just, it's conditional access protocol provider, and we just say we've remediated the user's conditional access claim. So here we can see some additional claims are coming through. It prompted that I needed MFA. That was the result of me doing my conditional access policies, and we converted that into a challenges MFA flag is true, which then prompted us to go through the MFA process. Now I've also got a user. If I flip over here and go to my users list, I've got another demo user that we've been using in other demos, my demo user 2. And what I've done is I've put them in this malicious users group, which was the group that was blocking our users from signing in. So if I now try to sign in with that user, which I think was it dave.demo, oops, can't type. Sign in. So we've now been blocked for this one because we're in our malicious users group and our conditional access policy said anyone in that group gets recommended for a block. What we've done, we've gone through the same steps in B2C. So we've still done our evaluate conditional access. That's still converted our recommendations into flags. But this time we've hit step 4, which says if the challenge is a block, then what we're going to do is we're going to show the block journey page, which is just a, where are we? It's a self-asserted block page with a particular message, blocked due to conditional access, blocked due to conditional access checks, and then in here, that's just another page. So all we've done is we've just prevented our user from progressing through their journey. We've blocked them based on the recommendations from our conditional access policies. Now we showed phone authentication there. That's not the only way of doing it. We do have another set of MFA set up. So what I've done for this is if I sign in with my user that I registered, so we're in control of the MFA journey here. We're just executing our, if I go down here, our register verify MFA subjourney. We could execute whatever we want here. Our subjourney here says we want 2 different kinds of MFA. We want our mobile phone, which we saw in my previous user, where they've already got it set up, but we might also want to authenticate or do the MFA using an authenticator app. So if I go through that, if I get my phone ready. So if I continue on here, so this is using the Google Authenticator. If I open that up on my phone and get my phone into view. So I've got a Google Authenticator app on my phone here. So as anyone who's used an Authenticator app will know, it's just a case of we'll scan the QR code, which will generate us a one-time passcode. So we're showing a page here to display the QR code so that I can register that in my Authenticator app, and I can then enter my QR code, or enter my verification code to confirm that I've registered with my Authenticator app. So we're doing the same conditional access checks here. It's still going through all the same policies, but our B2C policy is saying, I'm not just going to allow phones, I'm also going to allow this Authenticator app. So we've set it up with a Google Authenticator. Now that I've registered that, I can sign out. And if I sign in with that same user again, so we're still going through the same conditional access policies. If I start my phone up, but now we get a different 2FA step. We don't get the phone number anymore because this user's registered with the Authenticator app. We now get a different page which our B2C is providing. So if I now do 1038, so again entering my code from my app, verify that, and I'm in again. Again, exactly the same claims. It was still just an MFA check. We just chose to interpret that as we're going to do an Authenticator MFA check for this particular person. And that is conditional access. There's a lot going on there, so feel free to get in touch with us if you've got any questions about like the process or what we can do off the back of it or anything like that. But ultimately it's an MFA or block recommendation, and then we choose how to respond to that particular recommendation.
Brilliant, thank you, Dave. So there we've seen an example of some of the additional security that can be applied to user journeys based on the Microsoft risk calculation. And as we've just seen, B2C can send the one-time passcode to a mobile phone registered against the account, or could use the Authenticator app that's linked to the account to perform that multi-factor authentication step. And that gives a bit more confidence that the journey is being undertaken by the actual account owner, not by a malicious user who somehow managed to gain access to the username and password. So there's a growing number of alternative credentials that can be used to provide MFA, or perhaps even to replace username and password as the login. Authentication factors fall into three classes. We've got something you know, such as your username and password, or a PIN, or a knowledge-based question. We've got something that you have, such as an application or a mobile phone, or a hardware token, so what we've just seen there. Or we've got something that you are, such as use of facial recognition or fingerprint, some kind of biometric. And as we've said, as we've seen in various recent discussions, B2C is capable of integrating with external systems through the use of APIs. And there are a number of authentication credentials that provide an authentication API, allowing them to be used by B2C as that external credential provider. There's also a growing market in hardware security tokens, implementing standards compliant authentication such as FIDO2 tokens and smart cards. In each of these cases, the hardware token needs to be bound to the user's account as part of the registration process, allowing a secret held on the device to be bound to secrets stored against the user record. So we just saw that with Dave registering his Google Authenticator app against the account first time round, and thereafter that binding was in place, allowing the authentication to take place using that device. It's also possible to use FIDO compliant credentials built into the device, such as Windows Hello for Business on a corporate laptop, or perhaps to use Face ID or fingerprint ID checks on a mobile device. In this case, the authentication method actually unlocks the device, which then provides access to the private key. And it's the private key that's then used to sign an authentication request that's sent to the identity system. And the binding that was created during that device registration then allows the identity system to verify the signature and therefore trust that the request came from that registered device. And finally, for anyone who's been following our webinar series on decentralized identity, verifiable credentials that are issued to a user's wallet can also be used as an authentication mechanism. For any more information on the use of verifiable credentials, I'd urge you to watch the past webinars on our YouTube channel and to register for the upcoming session next month. So that's it. That's what we've got for this session. We've described the ability to integrate with external email providers to support generation and sending of customized emails, following the service provider's branding and so providing a consistent user experience. We've discussed the ability to implement conditional access to provide additional security steps where a user's login journey has been identified as potentially risky by Microsoft. And we've highlighted a few of the alternative types of credential that can be used to bolster or perhaps even replace the traditional username and password as the login credential. So let's have a look at the questions that have come in. Okay, it looks like conditional access feature is preview. Is it not yet generally available?
No, it's still in public preview, so it's there for anyone to use, but Microsoft have particular limitations around that. So limitations around support or availability. You know, if you're confident that it's working, you're confident that it's working, but Microsoft won't necessarily support it in the same way that they would general availability.
Okay. All right. Are there any constraints on where I can hold the email templates and branding to ensure that they can be reused for pages and emails?
No, not as such. That really comes down to how your email system works and how you want to integrate that with B2C. So we saw here that we were using SendGrid, right? And we had all the templates in there. We could use something else like MailJet, but that works on the same kind of principle, right? We define the templates in the service and use that service's API to send it. It might be that you want to send the emails using SMTP, say. You can't integrate SMTP directly with B2C, so you'd have an API that wraps up the SMTP call. Maybe as part of that API, you're also hosting the templates as HTML files or as something that you can then render into a HTML email and then using SMTP to send it. So it does depend on how exactly your email system is implemented, but there are definite ways of trying to make sure that your emails are consistent with your branding. Specifically, your emails are consistent with the branding that you're showing in B2C. It's just about how you arrange it all.
Okay, so there's no constraints on having to do it in a particular way, but it's supported to allow you to gain that consistency.
Yeah, B2C is ultimately making an API call here. So it's all about how does that API call tie into the rest of your systems? If you've got email templates and you've got other branding, do they all live in the same place? And then your email API is responsible for retrieving that email template from that place, merging it in with the data and then sending it on. Or, you know, do you want to use something like SendGrid or MailJet or one of the many others that are out there to hold your emails as a specific thing and accept that you're designing them there? Maybe that's separate from the design of your pages.
Okay. What if conditional access prompts for MFA? The user hasn't registered for MFA and I don't want them to register.
Yep, so the conditional access policies, the fact that it's recommending MFA, it's down still to the B2C policies to respond to that, right? And they can respond to that however they want. So in our case, for the journeys that I set up here, just to kind of demonstrate the MFA process, I had it register for the user for MFA if they were prompted for it and they hadn't already registered. I could equally have sent those users down that block journey. So where we had the technical profile and the steps set up so that if your challenge was a block, you got shown that block page, maybe in the scenario there, what we do is if I've recommended for MFA, but I don't have MFA registered, I get shown that same block page or a similar block page that says, please contact our support. We can't sign you in at the moment. You know, maybe some additional information like it looks like a risky journey or some correlation ID so support can look up the journey that the user went through. You know, it's all within our control, right? We decide how we respond to the recommendations coming out of those conditional access policies.
Right. Okay. Slightly longer one here. How easy is it to extend the exceptions for conditional access? For example, if the trusted users can sign in via more than one VPN or location, can it use the domain name of user email address to differentiate staff from customers? That's two separate questions, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So the first one essentially was, I think, can we have multiple trusted locations?
Yes.
So yes, you know, if I flip back for a second, back to our B2C tenant, which was this one, wasn't it? Oh, hello. Azure portal died. So in our B2C tenant, when it eventually loads, we have got B2C, conditional access, default require MFA. So I could set up in my conditions, locations. So I want to prompt for MFA any locations except for selected locations. And then I can set up, IP ranges, a number of different types of IP or a number of different individual IPs, label them appropriately, check the ones that I want to exclude, select those, and then I'm prompting everyone for MFA except the people coming from one of my various different VPN locations, right? So yes, you can be quite granular, quite configurable here about what exactly you're doing around locations. Now, the second part of that was, can you do anything with domains? And the answer to that is technically no, but really yes. You've just got to go about it in a certain way. You've got to get a little bit creative, maybe. So what you could do is say, set up particular groups that apply to staff members. So set up a staff member group and then have any staff members that are coming into the system be added to that group. So then anyone in that group or all of the staff members could have a particular policy applied to them, or you could apply to a particular policy to anyone who's not in that group. So then you're getting your staff member based logic, but it's not technically based on the domain name in that it's not configured in here based on the domain name, but maybe the process that adds them to that group does it based on domain name. Right. You could also do it at a more B2C policy level, where you know how we've got all these various preconditions on various different things. Maybe you have whitelists of domains and then only do the conditional access checks based on a user being in or out of that domain whitelist. So there's a few different ways of approaching it. None of them are kind of as a first order doing it on domain name, but they all interpret the domain name to then make an additional check that does either fit into B2C or fits into your actual conditional access policies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it feels like there's no single answer to that. It kind of depends what you're trying to do. So if you were using federated, for example, then it would be different path through. So you'd actually be federating against separate Active Directory and therefore not doing the conditional access. Yeah,
and at the moment, this only applies to local accounts as well. So one of the things that you have to specify as part of your journey, which I'll try and look it up very quick and probably fail, is federated. Has to be false at the moment. So you can only run the conditional access policies on a user that's not federated, someone who's actually part of the B2C directory.
Okay. And one more question. Is the remediation step mandatory? What's the purpose of using it?
I think that feeds back into the Microsoft logic, right? So if you go through, say you calculate the risk scores, or rather AAD calculates the risk scores, by the user providing MFA as a second check and us saying we've now remediated that issue by doing MFA, that sends another signal back in that may then affect that risk score. Because while B2C or AAD picked up that that was a risky user or a risky sign-in, we've just done something that maybe affects how risky that user is or how risky that sign-in was. So it's all part of the signals and the checks that are going on.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's all the questions we've got. So thank you all for attending. I hope you found this session useful and that you'll join us in the last webinar in this series next month. If there are any B2C related topics that you want us to cover in the last session, then please do get in touch. In the final session in the series, we're going to have a look at some of the areas associated with larger scale multinational systems. So such systems require additional attention to be paid to partitioning, distribution of user data to ensure acceptable response times, support for multiple languages, multiple sets of branding, And careful thought has to be given to the architecture implemented to provide resilience to support the high volume throughput that's needed. And as a reminder, we've also got our SSI webinar series, which has been talking about the concepts of decentralized and self-sovereign identity. All the initial broadcasts are available on our website if you didn't manage to catch them at the time. The next one in that series, in fact, the last one in that series, is scheduled for Wednesday, the 17th of March. So please make sure that you sign up for that if you want to understand some of the advantages that can be gained from using verifiable credentials. And as always, if you want to discuss any aspects of identity and access management, or if you're interested in using Azure AD B2C for your identity and access management systems, please do get in touch with us using the details shown. Thanks again for attending. Hopefully you'll join us on the next one. Goodbye for now.